Hello, my name is Dr. Nish Sonwalkar, and I'll introduce you in a very brief way how we can create a pedagogical framework with a learning cube kind of thinking, which I've been proposing for many years. As you know, in education theory, there are three different schools of thought which have been dominating the discussion and the debate. One is cognitivist learning, where it is assumed that the mental processes are important for the learning process. Then behaviorist model, where the understanding is that there are certain activities we can create conditioning of the human brain and make it learn by doing certain exercises, and which is called operant conditioning. And the third one, which has more recent beginning, is constructivist, where it is said that let the learner construct a domain of learning where you can learn together. So there has been a lot of research in all three models, behaviorist, cognitivist, and constructivist. And there have been theoretical as well as thought leaders in each area. As you know that in the area of behaviorist learning model, B.F. Skinner had presented a lot of different theories in order to create behavioral model where you can do certain exercises, you can provide certain incentives, and change the behavior of the learner. The Pavlovian dog theory came from that when you have a bell and the food is connected, and so a dog will salivate as soon as he listens to the bell. Similarly, B.F. Skinner did lots of experiments with different animals and also human beings to see how he can provide certain incentives to change their behavior. In the cognitivist model, where David Merrill and Randy Spiro, kind of leading thought leaders, have experimented understanding the mental maps, as they call it. So if you understand how the cognitive processes can be enhanced by situations, which is called situated learning, or component display methods, where you can take a thought process, create the components, and understand how the learning is happening in a cognitivist way with the creation of mental models. That was the emphasis of David Merrill, as well as some of the theory which came after that, which is called flexible cognition. So that's where Randy Spiro did experiments saying that, let's say if we have a domain and we crisscross that domain, then we can become familiar and understand that domain by crisscrossing that domain in a very flexible way. That's where flexible cognition came from. But if you look at, there are other theories in constructivist model where you also looked at the Piaget's work, where he looked at all the young kids growing up and said, how are they constructing and how are they creating the knowledge domain, almost like a sandbox approach. So if you do incidental learning, which comes from the theory of constructivism, where if you go to, let's say, a science museum, and by looking at all these artifacts, you're learning as an incident which is happening there by your act of going through this science museum. That will be an incidental learning process. If you look at a discovery process, where maybe you are given a kit and say, why don't you construct a small motor, and all the components are given there, that would be a discovery or project-based learning. So if you look at incidental learning or collaborative learning, where you are learning through discussion and dialogue from the people who already know the subject matter, these were the ideas of constructivist learning. Then also there are other theories which came up, like Howard Gardner's multiple intelligence theory, which also propose that there could be certain kinds of intelligences which are more predominant in a particular learner. You may have more mathematical intelligence, or let's say musical intelligence like Mozart, or mathematical intelligence like Einstein, or if you look at some of the other very highly developed artistic intelligences, Michelangelo's. So these were the examples that one should identify some of the predominant models there in cognitive psychology way and apply that. So when I looked at almost 300 of these models, I said, let's create a pedagogical framework where we can again use three sides of the coordinates defining a cube, where multimedia is one side and learning models is let's say y-axis, and interactivity is z-axis. So in that, starting from behaviorist model to cognitivist model to constructivist model, I came up with 5 strategies which we can line up on the y-axis of this learning cube, starting from apprentice, which is coming from behaviorist model, incidental, which is coming from constructivist model, inductive and deductive, which is coming from cognitivist model, and discovery, which is again coming from constructivist model. And the way I put them together in this cubical framework is that go from the simplest to most complex way of learning. So the simplest way would be step-by-step learning, which is apprentice, where mentor-student relationship can be created and a mentor can provide certain steps, and you can practice those steps and learn by apprentice mode, and that's procedural way of learning or linear way of learning is called apprentice. Incidental is the model where I can provide you a real life scenario. So I can take you to as I said earlier, a science museum, and that triggers a lot of these scientific theories about, let's say, pendulum, or it could be of lever of different kinds, as you can go through the artifacts in a science museum. So that's where it becomes incidental learning. So incidental learning is triggered by events which you are looking into a real life situation. Inductive learning is example oriented. So once I show you lots of examples coming from different situations which are encountered either in theoretical way or in a very pragmatic way, those examples are leading to a certain principle, and they're inducing that idea of the principle behind these examples. It's called inductive learning. And that's, as I said, coming from cognitivist theories. And let's look at deductive. And deductive comes from learning by doing. So let's say if I have a gizmo and which has lots of buttons, and I push every button and I understand that, and I see the trends which are generated as I'm developing and creating this project. And as you know, most of the schools and learning institutions prefer project-based learning. There is a term project at the end of the class, and students spend enormous amount of time learning through project-based learning, and that's called deductive learning. Because once you construct certain steps, then you deduce the next steps by doing this practical experiments. So that's based on deduction. And finally, the discovery-based learning is where you are in a simulated environment and you are then feeling that environment in which you have to learn. For example, when astronauts learn about spacewalk, they are put in a virtual learning environment, or sometimes they're also put underwater in a swimming pool. So now they're inside the swimming pool feeling the zero gravity because of the water around them, and now they are trying to manipulate their motions, and so that's called discovery based learning. So you are in a completely new learning environment, you are learning by discovery. So with these 5 different strategies, now I have covered almost all 3 major theories which are out there, the behaviorist, constructivist and cognitivist, and put them all together in a way that I can take content which is coming from various multimedia elements, text, graphics, audio, video, animation and simulation, and now I can construct them in a 5 different distinctive pathways. One could be step-by-step learning, another could be case study learning, third could be example based learning, fourth could be project based learning, and fifth could be discovery or experiment based learning. So if you look at now, the same content is now presented in a differentiated instruction, and that's where we are able to identify different learning preferences of individual learners. That's the theory of learning cube, where one side is multimedia, where we can vary text, graphics, audio, video, animations and simulation. Then we can construct 5 different pathways through all this learning media, and then third one is to provide them a diagnostic test to interact with the system. So now we can identify by diagnostic testing, which could be as simple as multiple choice questions which are asked on certain constructs as well as certain concept which a student is trying to or learner is trying to learn, and then providing them feedback in real time. So that becomes a framework where media, models, and interactivities are all put together. And that's called Learning Cube pedagogical framework.